A few days ago, I went with some friends to the ecotourism park. I had been there on several occasions, but it was the first time I visited the cabins, since the place is very large and is a little far from the park entrance. We were a group of 9 university students. We arrived in the afternoon, just before dusk, and the forest path we were on was quite narrow for my friend's car, and it was full of curves. We had a strange feeling. We even started to joke a little to free our attention, and we talked about what would happen if at some point, when we went around a curve, something came out and stood in front of us. When we got to the cabin, we saw that it had 2 doors. One main entrance led to a staircase and the place where we left the cars parked, and another one that was at the end of the cabin attached to a wall. We began to divide into groups. One went out, we stayed in the cabin, and among all the movement, we left both doors open. I wanted to go out to see the moon in that absolute darkness, since you enjoy a stellar view that normally it is not noticeable in the city. But when I left the cabin and turned off the light on my phone, the atmosphere began to feel hostile. I had a feeling of being watched. The wind began to blow harder and harder, and for a moment the door of the cabin seemed to be much further away, even though it was still in the same place. That was enough to make me go back to the cabin immediately. Approximately at 1 a.m, the 9 of us went to a nearby clearing to contemplate the sky on the opposite end of where we were. There was a somewhat weak light that suddenly flickered. It went out completely and then came back on. Near that light, there was a path to continue up towards the forest, and there, standing right in the middle, was what seemed to be a post. And I say it seemed because it was a tall, thin figure, completely motionless. One of the friends of the girl who was with us began to say that what he saw was a woman, and he said it upset enough for all of us to understand that it was not a joke. And trying to stay calm without panicking, we all tried to calm down and left the place acting as if nothing had happened. After the walk to the cabin, it was unusually long, about 10 more minutes, but the 9 of us returned. Once inside, we closed the doors and continued hanging out. 2 friends came out and stayed outside talking very close to the door at approximately 3 a.m. I was sitting on the couch that was right next to the back door of the cabin, talking like a friend. There were 7 of us inside when suddenly my friend interrupted me with a, "What was that?" He immediately stood up and opened the door, letting in a particularly cold atmosphere, while a small part of the forest was illuminated by the light on his cell phone. At the same time, one of the friends who were outside also asked what was happening. They had both heard something, apparently coming from the same place, although the other friend outside heard a sound like static, like the one made by radios. My friend, the one with me, said that he heard a very loud step on the leaves, but not a normal rustling sound, but rather as if someone or something was dragging themselves across them. When they came in, and they told me this, I was obviously uncomfortable. This feeling was increasing when I realized that someone was missing with us. I started to get very scared since we were extremely exposed in an area with no people around or cell phone signal. Added to that was what had happened earlier in the night when we all realized that there were only 8 of us, and in the seconds that we reacted, we went over to who was missing. We noticed something. The cabin had a kind of bunk bed that was completely dark because it was attached to the ceiling and could only be accessed by a ladder. At that moment, a noise was heard coming from there in the darkness, and then one of the friends came down. He claimed to have been asleep since midnight. As I told you before, 9 of us walked to the clearing and 9 of us came back. But who were we with? One of us stayed to sleep in the cabin. We couldn't sleep all night, and that stressed us out. At dawn, the cold was unbearable, so we decided to sunbathe outside the cabin, and we had 2 more surprises. The post that was in the middle of the road did not exist. In fact, there was absolutely nothing, even though all of us who were there, without exception, accepted having seen it. And the second surprise was the path to the cabin that had taken us half an hour to walk. The night before turned out to be only a few meters. It took us 2 minutes to get to the same place. It left us with many questions. Who or what was there in the middle of the road? Who was the 9th person who accompanied us if one of our friends stayed in the cabin? What were those lights in the forest? I don't know. We still have those doubts. Thanks for hearing my story.